Alright, so in my last video talking about Saudi Arabia, I said, look, if you have sources that you want me to look at, link them to me. I'll watch. One person was nice enough to give me one source. Of course, I watched it. And now I would like for us to watch it all. For us all to watch it. Here we go.
Thank you, Ambassador Shiga, for having me here this year once again. And I want to begin by talking about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and then I will talk about the regional situation. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned 2 years ago when I first came to speak here, is embarked on major transformation through our Vision 2030.
Now this is the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia. And when he said that right there, Vision 2030, something clicked in my brain. It took me a while to really kind of dig deep into my memory and bring up, what it was that was, tickling the back of my mind. But I remember sitting in a doctor's office. I don't even remember what it was for. And I'm sitting there reading Time magazine, and there was an article about the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the new Crown Prince. And that's where I remembered, oh yeah, there's a lot of things going on in Saudi Arabia right now. But we'll keep going, we'll get to that.
We are seeking to diversify our economy away from oil. We are seeking to open up new areas for investment. We are seeking to empower our youth. We're seeking to empower women.
Now right there, that's where I think that linking me this, while it was a good idea, might not have the exact result that the person intended. That right there is acknowledgement. If you're seeking to empower women in your country, that's kind of saying, we didn't do that up to this point. Right? So, you have to admit, the guy's kind of conceding here that there's been problems, but they're trying to better themselves. And I think that's great.
We are seeking to transform our country into a dynamic, innovative, transparent, accountable, efficient society. 70% of our population is under the age of 30. They have hopes, dreams, and ambitions, and our objective is to ensure that they can realize those hopes, dreams, and ambitions, and in the process lift our country to greater heights.
Sounds great!
In the past 2 years, we have made remarkable progress in terms of empowering youth, empowering women.
There it is again. But in the last 2 years, they've made strides. And that has to be recognized. That has to be acknowledged. We gotta admit, they're working on it. You can't fault somebody for the sins of the past if they're working to correct for the future.
In terms of opening up our economy, in terms of new legislation, in terms of attracting foreign investment, and in terms of reducing our income from oil and producing income from other areas.
It's also very smart when your country, all the money that your country makes is based off of one individual product. That isn't really entirely sustainable, right? Especially when everybody else in the world is wanting to try and figure out new, cleaner ways of having fuel and whatnot. You got to kind of go with the flow. It's a damn good idea.
We are embarking on major initiatives in terms of NEOM, a futuristic city in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia that will be a hub for technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, clean energy. We are embarking on other initiatives in terms of the Red Sea project. We are embarking on initiatives in terms of recreation and entertainment. And all of this is transforming the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the reason this is happening is because as we move in this direction, we become stronger, we become wealthier, and we become less susceptible to the dangers and the crises around us in our region.
Fantastic. Gotta say, I love this guy, love what he's talking about. But let's dig a little bit deeper into Vision 2030. Let's really get into it and see who the architect is, what the ultimate ideas are, and how this is going to ultimately change the region of Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman isn't waiting for his turn at the throne to take his country in a radically different direction. The 32-year-old prince is distancing himself from hardline Islam, progressing women's rights, and looking past oil for income.
So it's this guy, Mohammed bin Salman. And I gotta say, I like what the guy's trying to do.
But not since the reign of the country's founder has this much power been in one man's hands.
Here's a man who identifies himself as the leader of this country, even though his father still remains king.
And see, that's where a lot of the criticism of him is coming from. Let's say, we've seen this sort of thing before, but, you always have to hope this time it'll be different. And of course, you got to look at the guy's working with. He's working with a very troubled country, and he's trying to make things better. He's trying to bring his people into a more modern way of thinking, more modern way of doing things. And that's gotta be tough.
This is the story of a Saudi millennial whose progressive yet autocratic tendencies are sending shockwaves through the entire region. Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS, hasn't always been in line for the Saudi throne. For decades, the throne has been passed from elderly brother to a slightly less elderly brother, all sons of the founder of Saudi Arabia. But MBS is set to buck that trend.
His relationship with his father has put him in a position that has allowed him to leapfrog other members of his immediate family because of the trust that his father seemingly has in him.
That close bond was years in the making.
So, it seems that he's kind of, like they said, leapfrogging the general way that things have always been done. And the one thing I gotta say about it is at least he's not killing off all the opposition to do it. You know what I mean? In bygone years of yore, that would have been the way it was done. So at least he's not doing that. That's a good sign.
Unlike his brothers, the prince was educated in Saudi Arabia.
He was by his father's side through most of his childhood, and so he understands how the royal family works from an insider's playbook.
And I gotta say, I like that. I've always encouraged promoting from within, you know what I mean? I like that sort of thing. The guy knows the region, he knows the system. That's a good step.
A few years after graduating from King Saud University, the prince went to work for his father, then the governor of Riyadh. In 2011, his father was named defense minister, but MBS was initially barred from entering the ministry because of rumors that he was disruptive and power-hungry.
That's a bit disturbing. But of course, that's also 7 years ago. There's a lot of hope involved in everything, you know what I mean?
Gradually, the prince worked his way back into the then king's good graces, and he was assigned to Ministry of Defense, where he brought in Western consulting firms to streamline bureaucratic inefficiencies.
That also sounds like a good idea. Bureaucratic inefficiencies do just all sorts of chaos in a bureaucracy. Guy seems like he's got his good head on his shoulders.
In 2015, his father became king and gave his favorite son unprecedented control over the majority of government. The prince became known as Mr. Everything. Finally, in the summer of 2017, the king named him Crown Prince, the first in line, bypassing his uncle, one of many older and more experienced statesmen.
He would describe himself as the first Saudi leader of this stature raised in the internet age, and someone who grew up playing video games.
Gotta say I identify with that.
Peter Waldman writes about the Middle East and interviewed the prince for Business Week.
He compares himself to the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and says, I'm going to take my state in a kind of visionary direction.
In 2016, the prince launched Vision2030, his plan to transform Saudi Arabia by weaning the nation off of oil and liberalizing society.
So it all seems to be from this one guy. He's like, look, we gotta do better. We gotta match pace with the rest of the world, because otherwise we're in deep trouble.
He's lifted the prohibition on women driving. He's introduced public entertainment, such as concerts, and he's allowed cinemas to open.
The prince also plans to fulfill what he calls different dreams for a post-carbon future. A major piece of that plan is to sell shares in the state-owned oil company, Saudi Aramco, which could create the biggest IPO in history.
The reaction to the Aramco IPO has been one of enthusiasm and I think a bit of shock, depending on where you're looking at it.
Now, for those of you who may not really understand what exactly that means, Saudi Aramco is a government-owned oil company, and he's going to try to take that public. He's going to be selling it on the open market. That's huge. That's like the reverse of socialism. You know, socialism is the government wants to control all the businesses. This guy's saying the government controls this business. We can do a lot better for ourselves if we get people involved, if we get investors to want to also be a part of this. I'm liking this guy.
For years, the kingdom has relied on petroleum for 90% of the state budget, almost all of its export earnings, and more than half of its gross domestic product.
They brought in huge oil revenues and spent it for their own survival as a royal family in terms of subsidizing lifestyles among Saudis so they wouldn't push back against this very autocratic family.
The collapse of oil prices from $140 a barrel to the 30s in 2016 caused the IMF to declare that the country would be bankrupt by 2020 if it carried on spending as much as it does.
What this 32-year-old prince has said very clearly is we can no longer rely on oil to fund our lifestyles. We have to begin to contribute on a personal level, to work, to be entrepreneurial, to find investments, to find businesses like a normal state.
See, he wants to bring up his country to match pace with the rest of the world. It's something that we've all been saying that people in that region need to do for a very long time. Gotta hand it to the guy. At least somebody's listening.
The Crown Prince introduced taxes, slashed handouts, and is trying to make Saudis actually pay for the energy they consume.
See, that's where he might wind up running into some trouble. I'm sure there's a lot of people that aren't going to like that sort of thing. But, you know, he's rolling this out over the span of over a decade. So, that's, when it comes down to it, a relatively short amount of time. But at the same time, it is a pretty decent amount of time. So, never know.
The prince also heads an anti-corruption commission, and in the fall of 2017, he carried out an unprecedented purge of the Saudi elite, arresting 4 ministers, 11 princes, and countless businessmen. Most were freed after returning what were alleged to be ill-gotten gains.
By taking on his cousins in the royal family, he's sending a signal that he is dead serious about changing the Saudi system.
It's a bold move. Guy's got balls.
However, it has not applied to himself thus far, and I think his own personal excesses undermine the signal he's trying to send.
And I gotta admit, that is a little bit troubling.
While his approach may seem unforgiving, MBS is shaping the Middle East in ways no one could really have ever imagined. And being so young, he's likely to hold power for over a half-century, meaning there will be continuity of government, but without the checks and balances needed to prevent a dictatorship.
There's a lot of hope that goes into things.
Saudi Arabia is a police state from top to bottom, and it will continue to be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, you know, change has got to start somewhere. Looks like the guy's trying to do it. You can't really piss on him for that. He's working on it. He's doing things already. He's doing things. That's always a good sign when things are being done as opposed to just being say, yeah, we're gonna try and do this. He's doing it. So maybe I was a little bit overly harsh in my my prior critiques. I had forgotten about all of this. It was a while ago when I read that article, a year or so ago. So, you know, whatever. But when you do dig a little bit even deeper than this, you realize that he's not entirely popular with a whole lot of Saudi people. It's a very religious country, and many of their people believe that he is the Antichrist. because he's taken so much power away from the church, the mosque, whatever. So that is a thing. And a lot of people aren't entirely thrilled with paying taxes and whatnot and so on and so forth. And a lot of people are saying that he's essentially a tool of the West, that he's doing all of this to appease his Western overlords and things of that nature. So we'll see what happens. I think there's going to be massive amounts of growing pains involved in this. But, you know, like I said, the guy's doing something. That's pretty cool. You got to at least give him that. He's doing something.